The 1930s were a time of hardship and hope for the sharecroppers of Macon County, Alabama. One of these sharecroppers was a man named Herman Shaw. Herman spent his days tending his land under the unrelenting southern sun, earning just enough money to feed his family. Like many in his community, Herman didn't have access to doctors or modern medicine. So when government officials came to town offering free health care, it felt like a blessing. What Herman didn't know was that this offer came with a terrible price. He, along with hundreds of others, became the unwitting subject in one of the most unethical medical experiments in U.S. history. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study, a deeply troubling chapter in American history. The year is 1932, and the United States is in the midst of the Great Depression, where millions were struggling to survive. It was in this climate of desperation that Taliaferro Clark, the head of the U.S. Public Health Service, had an idea. Let's back up a little to give some context. Syphilis was a widespread public health issue, affecting roughly 1 in 10 Americans. Now, by the early 20th century, it was well established that syphilis is caused by Trypamina pallidum, which is a bacterium that was discovered in the late 19th century by a zoologist named Fritz Richard Schaunden and a dermatologist by the name of Heinrich Hoffmann. They had laid the foundation for the understanding of this disease as a bacterial infection. There was also a pretty good understanding of what happened when you left syphilis untreated. 22 years before Taliaferro started his study, another man by the name of Professor Cesar Boeck was finishing his. The name, the Oslo Study of Untreated Syphilis, also known as the Boeck-Brusgaard material. As the head of dermatology department at Oslo University Hospital, he and fellow Dr. Edvin Brusgaard withheld treatment from around 2,000 syphilis patients, allowing the disease to run its natural course. Now, this study, which I'll dive deeper into in another video, added crucial data to the understanding of syphilis's long-term effects. The study confirmed the severity of untreated syphilis, including how it could result in long-term damage to the nervous system and heart. The study also highlighted the devastating reality that syphilis could be fatal if left untreated, and that living with the disease for years without proper medical intervention led to severe, irreversible consequences. This was the accepted medical science in 1932. But Dr. Clark dismissed the Oslo study's findings, insisting they were irrelevant to his own research. You see, the Oslo study had focused on white men, and Clark argued that what he needed to study was black men, a group he believed would demonstrate different and yet unexplored results. He argued, quote, "The study would offer an opportunity to observe untreated syphilis in the male Negro in its natural course." Clark's theory was rooted in a deeply flawed and racist assumption about racial biology. He believed that black men would develop cardiovascular syphilis, while white men would suffer from neurosyphilis. His reasoning? A belief that white people were intellectually superior and black people were more physically robust. These assumptions were not based on science or facts, but rather on the pervasive racial stereotypes of the time. Stereotypes that shaped the course of this study. Now armed with the approval of the 5th Surgeon General Hugh S. Cummings, Dr. Clark enlisted the help of one Dr. Raymond Vondeleur to bring his controversial study to life. Armed with an official sanction, they set their sights on Alabama. where the study would unfold amidst a community unaware of the dangerous experiment they were about to be subjected to. And thus, the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male was born. Dr. Clark and Dr. Vanderleer knew that gaining the trust of the local African American community was crucial to the success of their experiment, so they turned to the Tuskegee Institute, an institution that held significant influence in the community. Founded in 1881 by Booker T. Washington, the Tuskegee Institute was a respected, historically black university in Alabama, dedicated to educating and training African Americans. The Institute's trusted reputation within the community was key in convincing the men to participate in the study, easing any concerns they may have had. The director of the Institute at the time was a man named Robert Maton. Robert was the first to offer his support. His position gave the study an air of legitimacy, and he helped facilitate the recruitment of participants, assuring them that the study was in their best interest. But there was also a man named Dr. Eugene Dibble. A physician at the Institute, he played a key role in aiding the study's progress. Some might even say he spearheaded the study, insisting that it be done with his school and his staff. So, once trust was established with the local community, PHS officials began to perform blood tests on hundreds of men to determine who was indeed infected. They used something called a Wassermann test. It was a tool commonly used to diagnose syphilis at the time. It detected the presence of antibodies. So once the results were in, they divided the participants into two groups: those who tested positive for syphilis, 399 men, and those who were uninfected, 201 men. Those men would serve as a control group. The men returned home, completely unaware of the cruel experiment being carried out at their expense. To help further establish trust in these men, the researchers enlisted the help of one Nurse Eunice Rivers. Eunice was a respected figure in the community, and she played a pivotal role in maintaining contact with the participants. She also administered tests and collected samples. Eunice wasn't just handling tests. She took on a much broader role. She was the one who made sure the men made it to their appointments, driving them to and from the clinic. She even provided them with meals and compensation for their time. She built trust with these men, offering comfort and reassurance, all the while ensuring they remained unaware of the truth behind their treatment. The truth was, the men were given placebos, sugar pills, saline solutions, and mineral water. That's another way of saying no treatment at all, only deception. At the end of the first year, the plan initially was to begin treating the men with salvarsan, a toxic drug used to fight syphilis. It worked by targeting the bacteria, but it was highly damaging to the body. However, the Rosenwald Fund, which had been supporting the study, pulled its financial backing due to the high cost associated with the treatment. Now, without the necessary funding for the treatment phase, the study's participants were left even further without care. But in the chaos, Dr. Vanderleer saw an opportunity. By shifting the study from treatment to observation, it could become a disturbingly cost-effective experiment in human suffering. He rationalized withholding treatment by claiming the participants were unlikely to seek medical care on their own anyway, callously dismissing their well-being as irrelevant to the pursuit of data. In a 1932 letter to Dr. Clark, Dr. Vanderleer said, "It is my desire to keep the main purpose of the work from the Negroes in the county and to continue their interest in the treatment." For nearly a decade, the men were lied to. They were kept in the study under false promises of treatment and made to endure the ravages of syphilis for the sake of data. By the 1940s, the men in the Tuskegee study were experiencing more severe and advanced symptoms. At this point, many of them were suffering from the effects of tertiary syphilis, which is the final stage of the disease and can occur 10 to 30 years after the initial infection. Some of the symptoms were neurological, such as mental deterioration, personality changes, coordination issues, and in some cases, paralysis. But there were also cardiovascular symptoms, such as chest pain, heart failure, bulging of the aorta, and an aortic aneurysm. As the men began to experience worsening symptoms, the researchers reassured them that their participation was critical to their health. They were even told that the invasive spinal taps they were receiving were part of their treatment. These participants trusted the medical professionals, and they believed they were receiving care. The researchers remained steadfast in their cruel observations, but the world outside the study was about to change in a way that could have potentially saved these men. In the early 1940s, a medical breakthrough was making waves that would offer hope to countless people, including those suffering from syphilis. The discovery of penicillin. Penicillin was first discovered by Alexander Fleming in 1928, but it wasn't until the early 1940s that this antibiotic was mass-produced and proven to be an effective cure for syphilis. As penicillin became the new standard for treatment, the medical community was buzzing with excitement at the prospect of eliminating this disease once and for all. Yet, despite the availability and effectiveness of penicillin, the men in the study were denied the treatment. The researchers were intent on observing the natural course of syphilis and chose to continue their experiment, sealing the men's fate, while the world outside was moving on from the disease. Dr. Vanderlei and the other researchers were singularly focused on the study's data, seeing these men as nothing more than test subjects in a grand experiment. They feared that introducing penicillin, which would cure the disease, would disrupt their observations, cutting the study short and leaving them with incomplete data. In their cold, calculated minds, the integrity of their research took precedence over the men's lives, and saving them from the ravages of syphilis was considered a secondary concern. To them, preserving the study's so-called purity was worth more than the suffering and death they knowingly allowed. And then, with full approval from 6th Surgeon General Dr. Thomas Perrin Jr., Dr. Vanderlei withheld treatment and continued to perpetuate the cruel and inhuman experiments. Let's take a moment here to truly grasp the magnitude of what was happening here. A group of men, supposedly with free access to information, were being exploited by a trusted institution that leveraged its reputation to mislead an entire community for profit. This wasn't just a rogue operation. It had the full backing of county, state, and federal governments, every level of the system working seamlessly together, forming a massive and coordinated conspiracy designed to uphold the status quo at the expense of human lives. By 1941, the United States formally entered World War II after an attack on Pearl Harbor. The government was actively preparing soldiers for deployment. Many of the men in the Tuskegee study were drafted into the military, where they underwent medical exams upon induction. During these exams, syphilis was frequently detected. The Army's medical officers, known as draft doctors, would typically prescribe treatments for those diagnosed with the disease. Unfortunately for the men involved, That's when Dr. Vanderlei got involved. Vanderlei continued to take steps to block their treatment. He arranged for the men involved in the study to be classified as part of a study cohort. So when they showed up for their physicals, the military doctors were instructed not to treat them in the usual manner. Their one hope for treatment was gone, stripped away by the very people sworn to protect them. For decades, the horrors of the study unfolded in silence. Men grew gravely ill, suffering the agonizing effects of late-stage syphilis, including blindness, organ failure, dementia, and crippling pain, while some unknowingly passed the disease to their wives and children, dooming generations to misery. Yet, one night, in a room filled with whispers, a man overheard a chilling conversation, a truth so dark it would shatter the study's secrecy and forever alter the course of history.